Hello and welcome to Wise Tales. Jamal Rasoully is the founder and CEO of the Halal Shack, a fast growing brand bringing New York's street food and Afghan flavors to college campuses nationwide. Starting with a single location in 2017, he's expanded to over 30 campuses with plans for 50 more. A former finance executive turned entrepreneur, Jamal's leadership has earned him numerous recognitions, including one of the most influential restaurant CEOs in the country. Jamal, welcome to Wise Tales.
Hey, thank you for having me. Pleasure being here.
Starting with our first question, you have emphasized continuity and consistency are the keys to restaurant success. But in your non traditional channels where you're closed during college breaks, it's harder to maintain that. How do you create that sense of continuity and operational excellence when the business is inherently seasonal?
Yeah, I would say probably our biggest challenge as a company. So when I first started Halal Shack, I really didn't know what would happen with the time off. But besides having no revenue, there is a silver lining. So one thing that we like to do during that time off is focus on all of our process improvements for the year, as well as gear our teams up for the next year. So we treat it very much like a season. So we have our semesters, and then during the summer, it's kind of like our in like football, which you would call like spring training or like your camp. So I think from a leadership team perspective, we don't really ever get time off. So we're working through holidays and through the summer and whatnot. But then from a unit level perspective, a lot of our teams actually enjoy the break. So I would say that the challenge outside of not having revenue has been how do we stay connected with the teams, or how do we reinvigorate the teams when we get back? And that's really been one of our, I would say, biggest initiatives from our field operations team, is trying to find a way to, you know, help the teams learn what they were doing over again, and hoping that that muscle memory kicks back in. And I will say one of the keys to doing this is there's a lot of change that happens when you're scaling a company, and with that change, there also comes fatigue. So that time off helps us with our unit level fight the fatigue, as when they come back, they're more susceptible and adaptable to the change, and it kind of invigorates them to see the improvements or the different way that we're going to do things that are better than the year before.
So, quick follow up question to that. You mentioned staying connected with the teams. I would say probably a lot of our listeners have that same struggle. While they might not be closed for summer or between
Okay.
semesters, they certainly have teams that show back up, college students, in different seasonal cycles. And so, what are some of the things that you've used or you've found that are really helpful in helping teams stay connected?
Yep. I think it's also one of the things that we're continuing to learn, and like how best way to go about it. So we've tried different approaches. I would say that currently one of the tools that we're using is very successful is our field operations teams doing site visits. And then in addition to those site visits, having multiple channels of communication based on the idea of communication. So what that means is, like, obviously we're going to have our Slack channel for support. We're going to have emails for things that need escalations. And then we're going to have just general communications with leadership that run the program through phone calls and whatnot. So as we continue to grow, it does get a lot harder though, because, with scale. So I think even since we last spoke, we're almost going to be at, 67 or 68 units for this August. So, just it's getting harder, and I will admit that I'm still learning the best way to do it. But so far, the way that we're doing it has worked. And I also think that sometimes in management, getting rid of layers makes things easier, at least for communication. So, like, I talk directly to general managers, especially like our corporate stores. I reach out to them once a week, even though we have amazing leadership people that they report to. But I do think to get the best feedback, I need to speak to people directly, and most of the time to customers directly. So I find it more beneficial for me, at least, to know if my team is connected, is by talking directly to the general managers and the customers.
So it sounds like you have incorporated technology, Slack, email, all of those things alongside that human interaction component with the field ops visits and everything else. Do you find any one of those tools are better than another, or is it more of a combo platter of all of the ways of communication?
Yeah, I would say that the technology is a great, way to, kinda like where there's smoke, there's fire. So with technology, you could kinda sniff out and investigate and identify what's needed, and also validate after the human part of it, what is being done. But that human part of it is essential. So I do believe that field operations and site visits, it's like you're in your territory, you should know every employee for sure. And then for me, I like to know as many people as I can. But I will say, like I said, that's getting harder. It's just it's impossible with the amount of turnover we have in the restaurant industry for me to keep up with it or for me to visit everywhere. But I will say that I like to think that Halal Shack is bigger than me, and that's why we have an amazing team. So as long as I can implement those principles in them, it kind of helps with the scale.
Yeah, and I imagine, you mentioned turnover there, going with a, let's say, like, summer break. How many, just to add context to the conversation, how many employees are gonna be brand new coming back from that versus how many are you carrying over from the semester before?
That's a really good question. So it depends in the region. We ironically don't have as much turnover as you think. I believe that the motivations of the employees that work in contract food service are different than the motivations of employees that work street side or work in fine dining or whatnot. So I would say that we have an amazing team, and the people that work in contract food service are unbelievable. So we have actually less turnover in full-time positions. The majority of the turnover is where you would expect it. It's in kids graduating and or people moving up. So there's a lot of promotion. I think there's a lot of it's an easy time to make good money in the restaurant space because if you're talented and you're hardworking, just there's so much room for growth. So we find our turnover to be in that sense where like it's either students graduating and or people who were amazing at one job got promoted to another job. So now we have to backfill a position. Now, with that being said, though, there is obviously going to be use cases. And that's why I start off by saying it's regional. There's certain regions where it's just tough to hire. I think that the Northeast is one of the toughest markets to hire. And if you ended the year short, you're most likely going to start the year short. And it is a lot harder to hire when the stores are closed because, and again, if we use case it out loud, it's like we had a restaurant opening up August 1, but it's July 1. No one's going to stay unemployed for that long. So you really can't hire till like 2 weeks before you open. Now try doing that times 100, right? It's really challenging.
Yeah, and I imagine you go through that same thing with your customer base as well. Like you're getting a new crop of freshmen who probably don't have a lot of familiarity with you. But I mean, I remember in college, you have such an emotional connection to all of the restaurants on campus. Like you've got your study places and everything. So I imagine you're doing that with your customer base as well.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty exciting. I would say that's what makes my job one of the best jobs because like the energy on college campuses due to the constant change that's happening is unbelievable. But I will say that every year that I've been in the business, the palette's getting more and more sophisticated. So considering where I started to where we are, I'm just excited to see where we're going to end up because of how much more talent is behind the palette and how much more exposure is there. Because I think street side is doing an unbelievable job, and a lot of big cities are melting pots for just some amazing food vendors.
So this actually is a great segue into a question I have around culture. And
Yes.
so you have talked before about translating your unique culture being a work in progress, as it should be, right? You were just talking about how it evolves over time and with the growth of the organization. So one of the areas that I'm really interested in exploring a little bit is your made with love philosophy that you've got.
Mhm.
How do you manage that, especially at this scale and the growth that you're seeing? How do you embed that in each of your areas?
Yeah, I think that I will still say it's a work in progress. So I can just tell you that you know the hardest part about doing what I do is that I can't do everything and I'm not going to be able to be everywhere all the time. So the culture that program and just the philosophy of our culture is made with love is that everything that you make it with love. And the goal and the premise behind that was that's how I started Halal Shack was I wanted to serve food the way that my parents served me food, specifically my mom and dad. And the food had so much love that it tasted good no matter what. So I think that not being able to be everywhere all the time, and me myself also not just it's just humanly possible to do everything. It's hiring the right people. And I would say that's the work in progress because when you hire someone, you really don't know the direction it could go in. But the reality is that if you keep your systems to be aligned with your culture, then the wrong people weed themselves out. And it's really managing that, right? It's managing that time in which you're weeding that person out against what the system has. So our work in progress is just trying to every day mitigate the time that we weed someone out or the person with the wrong culture who's not the right fit is not teaching it correctly. It's what do we have in our system to reinforce that. So I would say it starts from the SOPs with the recipes, the ingredient cards, and the training, and it ends with our site visits, site assessments, the technology stack that we have, and the human aspect of our hiring process.
And then you've mentioned the site visits a couple times. Can you kind of take us through that process? Like, what are your takeaways look like? How do you deliver those as actionable items for each restaurant?
Yeah, I would say that there's every brand out there does site visits, but for us, it's extremely impactful, just like it is for every brand, because it's a snapshot into the window of reality, as opposed to like the audits that we do or anything else that we do through our technology stack, where it helps, like I said in the beginning, tell us where there might be smoke, but it's also never going to be the same as the experience you get being there yourself or using like a mystery shopper program. So the actionable takeaways that we have is tying in the variances of their operation to our program standards, which tie directly into our culture and our SOPs. And then the more we're able to do that, the better that the units can run. Almost every one of our partnerships are amazing partnerships. So, no one opens a Halal Shack, Jamal's Chicken, or Bravo's Pizza without the intention of wanting to do the right thing. So, the more that we could shine a flashlight on what the right thing looks like, the easier it is for them to do it.
That sounds fantastic. I think my guess is it's one of those things on paper, right? As part of it. What do you find are some of those biggest challenges? And I know you talked a little bit about making sure that your teams reflect your culture, making sure that the right people are in the right roles. But I would imagine each region, like we talked about earlier, Northeast is hard to hire in. Each region has its own flair and flavor. And so, going back to that original question around consistency, how do you account for some of that nuance that comes into running businesses in different regions of the country?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I would say that the idea of like being able to account for it is something that I gave up on because the outliers are so many. Like there's just so much that you can run into and you just don't know how to deal with it. So the reality is I have an approach toward not knowing how to deal with it, which just ties back to our core principles. And generally, when I find myself in that situation, I just reflect on the decision engine of our core principles, and that's what drives me back. Now, there's like there's an ease to the human aspect of it in the sense of like application and training because we have SOPs and standards, and that's pretty straightforward. It's like this is how you run a unit, this is how you make this, and et cetera, et cetera. But it's the reaction to dealing with the reality of how the unit's being run that I just always go back to like our core principles. And I'm sure you guys have heard it before, but we do have a process for RCAs, which is like a root cause analysis. So when issues mountain up, we generally can understand where it is. And then we take that RCA and we have a tool to pinpoint the solution. And sometimes that solution is the one where I'm like, how did we get here? Like how did this happen? And then we have to go back to our core principles and be like, this is where we veered off the tracks. But it happens. So like not like having an expectation of like this is gonna happen and I can't plan for it. I just have to show up every day with the best of intentions, makes it a lot easier. Because it's impossible for it not to happen. And it doesn't matter what brand you are. They're honestly the really good brands are where it happens the most because they're driving most of the business. So the biggest brands, the busiest brands, it's where it happens the most.
And you were previously listed as one of NRN's most influential restaurant CEOs in the country. What advice do you have for our listeners on navigating the ups and downs of building a business in a challenging industry? And what's something that our listeners can do today to make a better tomorrow?
That's a, you know, I would say that just continuing being a student, like I still really feel as if I'm learning every day. And I think that it's very similar to like a 400-meter race. Like every 400 meters, you have to pass the baton off to someone. And it's like, as, as you grow within your company, like I still have a ton of growth and I'm sure I'm underdeveloped in areas as a leader. So I have to make sure that I can understand what my blind side is and know where to water the grass to get it greener versus where I can be like, okay, that's okay. So in hindsight, the best advice I have is just always be open to learning and being okay with the mistakes that you make. Almost every mistake is fixable.
I I think that is, and it really ties back to the last question that we talked about on how to account for those unforeseen and unaccountable sorts of activities,
Yeah.
right? Just continually learn. And it sounds like you have a pretty strong value system around continuing to be a student. Do you hire people for their willingness to learn, their willingness to grow? It's sort of that static mindset versus that growth mindset. Is that something you look for when you're filling your units with leadership?
Yes. Um, it's so hard to tell though, because like, if you're interviewing someone, they might have a willingness to learn, but who wants to learn about labor laws in California as they change every year, right? So it's like, and that's not a dig on California. It's just like, and it's like I love what Mike Tyson says. Like everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So it's like I feel like everyone you interview or you meet, they have the right intention. Like they want to learn. No one like goes to work at a job and says like, I just want to be, stuck here. But the problem is that your attitude determines your latitude. So I like to think I hire for attitude. I don't hire for anything else because I can teach them everything else. And the restaurant industry is so amazing in that like you don't have to have the most experience to be taught how to do something because the way that I need you to do it is not the way that Kava needs you to do it. Like just different beasts, different companies, different skill sets. So with that, I think that the the biggest attribute I look for is attitude, and it's more about outcomes. It's not really how you get there. It's about how are we doing it and what's the actual outcome, not hypotheses. It's more why are we doing it and what's the outcome, not how we did it. Doesn't matter.
Okay, so I have written down two statements that you've said in the last 3 minutes. Continue being a student, and then attitude determines your latitude. And so I do want to end this conversation with a question we ask all of our guests. So you can't use either one of those because those
I,
are already part of our conversation.
I can't take credit for the attitude one. I'm pretty sure it's a Kanye West song from somewhere at some point, but it's like so long ago, but I never forgot it because it makes sense.
It does make sense. It's
Yeah.
great. So if you were to design your own bumper sticker, what would it say and why?
Discover deliciousness. Um, and why is because when I started Halal Shack, one of our taglines that like I thought of was discover deliciousness because I felt as if like that discovery in that journey of like deliciousness is what makes food great, and it's like just think of like pancakes in the morning with like syrup that are just fresh and like you're just discovering deliciousness or like making fresh baked cookies or having a bowl at the Halal Shack. So my bumper sticker would definitely be discover deliciousness.
Which really ties back to continue being a student, right? And you talked
Yeah,
about the sophistication of palettes and everything else. And so it's a journey, not a destination.
absolutely. Yeah, you'll never actually get there. You know what I mean? Like the goalposts just keep changing. Yeah.
It's the fun of it. Well, Jamal, I want to thank you tremendously for being part of our conversation today. I am so excited to be a partner in your growth as you continue to build at all of these fantastic universities and campuses across the country. And thank you again.
Yeah. Thank you guys for having me.
Thanks, Jamal.